Okay, welcome everybody. I am extremely happy to introduce you Margherita Spagnuolo Lobb. I did try to summarize her bio, but she has done so many things that it has been extremely difficult, I have to admit. So I hope I have done a decent job. Margherita Spagnuolo Lobb is a psychologist, psychotherapist, and a Gestalt therapy trainer. She's the founder and director of the Istituto Gestalt HCC in Italy. She has worked extensively, not only by doing a lot of research, epistemological research, but also by developing new therapeutic approaches. She leads Gestalt therapy workshops, training programs in more than 20 countries, and she cooperates worldwide with various research groups on psychotherapy. She's the director of the Advanced International Training Programs in Gestalt Therapy Field Approach to Development and Psychopathology, of training programs for supervisors, and of summer programs for psychotherapists. She's also director of many book series, and she published extensively in many languages. And today she's here to talk about psychopathology of the situation, Gestalt therapy field-oriented approach. And I'm looking forward to hear your talk.
Okay. Thank you, Valeria. Thank you, Francesca. I'm very honored to be here and share our thoughts with you and your group. And like Francesca said, it's very interesting to create bridges between Gestalt therapy and phenomenology, or phenomenology and Gestalt therapy. So I'm honored to be here, and I hope to create bridges with you, to especially starting from your interest in what I will propose to you. I will explain very briefly how Gestalt therapy draws on phenomenology and what is the difference that this creates into clinics, how Gestalt therapy is different from other approaches just because it draws on phenomenology. And before starting my talk, I would like to hear from you, if you don't mind, just your name and what you do and your interest to be here.
Should I start?
Sure.
Hello, my name is Duygu. I'm based now in Germany. I'm a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, and since a couple of years, I'm trying to do phenomenological study also. So
you're a psychiatrist.
Psychotherapy patients. So I'm excited to see what you're going to tell us today. Thank you.
Duygu. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Eric Guidry, and I'm here as a student in the PhenoLab.
And you live where?
Oh, Boulder, Colorado, United States.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
Hi, my name is Manuel. I'm from Brazil, and I am a clinical psychologist.
Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Morlock, and I'm from southern Germany, Schwäbisch Gmünd. I'm not a psychologist and not a psychiatrist. I'm an cultural anthropologist, and I'm working in the field of knowledge transfer at the University of Design. But I'm also like a systemic consultant and transactional consultant, and I got in touch with Gestalt therapeutic concepts a lot with my trainers, so I'm interested in the field in a whole and to learn more.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Okay, maybe the others are not here because the video is off. So I will Public transport, interesting. Research assistant at the psychology department in Turkey, clinical psychology. I have some problem with my camera, and he's from Turkey, working in Germany, research in neuroscience. Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you for those who have written, who have introduced themselves in the chat. So I will present to you very briefly some bridges. And it's not, you know, it's a very brief thing, very rough, let's say, not, but we can go deeper into this in the when we will have our exchange. So the title I gave is The Phenomenological Soul of Gestalt Therapy. The founders of Gestalt therapy were psychoanalysts, or very much connected with psychoanalysis that at that time, I mean, late 40s and beginning of 50s, at that time, psychoanalysis was the most spread dynamic psychotherapy. They were not happy about psychoanalysis at that time. They were critical towards psychoanalysis. They were clinical psychotherapists, psychoanalysts, and also director of schools, so immersed in some problems and social problems. The birth of Gestalt therapy was in New York in the 50s. And the main founders are a couple of German psychoanalysts, Fritz and Laura Peirce, who studied not only psychoanalysis, but also Gestalt psychology in Berlin, in the Berlin School. So they knew very well the laws of perception, and they were trained in the idea that perception is a creative act of the mind. And they were acquainted with the idea that the organism organizes in a harmonic way the experience. So they criticized psychoanalysis, especially about the idea of I don't like to stay always with this slide, especially about the idea of aggression, of biting and aggression, because they said that a child needs to bite, and this is a positive aspect of the organism of the child. And so they proposed the idea that aggression is a normal and positive strength in human beings. And doing this, they moved the anthropological rule of that was still in psychoanalysis, and then that they considered aggression like not a positive strength, but a strength connected with the death drive. And Peirce said aggression is not connected with death drive, but it's a normal, spontaneous strength of the organism, and it's in service of the self-regulation of the organism. So they made an important anthropological switch there, because they made peace with the animal soul, let's say. So there was this criticism, and the criticism was about psychoanalysis was about the strength of the ego. They say the psychoanalysis doesn't consider the ego in a very strong way. The id is more important. So they say we need to support the ego. We need to create a a theory that supports the capacity of the ego, like a creative strength of the person. And they also said an important criticism was about vitality of the person. They criticized the fact that psychoanalysis, the outcome of psychoanalysis was a person who knows everything about him or herself, but is not vital. So they know everything, but they're not vital. They miss that vitality that is embedded in the organism, in the human organism. And they wanted to create a theory that considers this vitality. And they created the word egotism. Egotism was for them the it was the iatrogenic disease that psychoanalysis created in clients, in patients, because they knew everything, they said, about themselves, but they don't have the vitality. So they wished to create a method able to keep the patient's vitality. And they addressed phenomenology as a way of keeping this vitality. They learned phenomenology. This couple of psychoanalysts and Gestalt psychologists, they moved to New York, first to South Africa and then to New York. And there they called some people that they had known about, like Paul Goodman, because they wanted to discuss these ideas. So they gathered every week. They gathered together, and they experimented this, what they said, on themselves. And the one who knew phenomenology among them was Isidore Fromm. Isidore was an American social worker and phenomenologist, and he was a client, a patient of Frederick Peirce. Then Fritz Peirce called him to discuss in this small group, and also Paul Goodman. He was a very talented writer, American writer. He came from Chicago, and he was one of the main figures of the movement of students in 1968. So they were in New York for a short time to create this new method and to publish a book that is called Gestalt Therapy: Excitement and Growth in the Human Personality. So why did they address phenomenology? Because phenomenology looks at the experience itself, how it unfolds in the near future, and this allowed the founders to build on a new perspective on psychopathology and psychotherapy. So in phenomenology, there is not the unconscious or conscious, but there is the experience in the here and now as it unfolds in the near future. So in this way, they could consider psychopathology as psychopathology of the situation, as something that is related to the relational aspect of the relational suffering of the person. And they addressed psychotherapy not like a tool to discover unconscious conflicts, but like a tool to support intentionality. So intentionality was the strength that is connected with the vitality of the persons. So the tool of psychotherapy is no longer to reveal the unconscious, but to support intentionality. An example could be a client comes to us and he says, I came here because I want to cure my panic attacks. Okay. What do we do in front of this? What do we think? What do we look? We do not think in terms of conflicts that the person doesn't know, unconscious conflicts that bring the person to this outcome of panic attacks. But we look at how the person appears to us. So the how is more important than the what. We look at how the person appears to us, which means the process, the movement and the process and the bodily process. So what we do, we look at how the person says that, for instance, if he says that I suffer panic attacks, and he says that in a way that he feels, we understand that he feels humiliated, for instance, or he feels like opposite, like he's dressing a nice dress, a fashion dress. And how is his body? While he tells us that, maybe he's nervous, he moves his leg nervously, or he's calm. Is it rigid or relaxed? Does he breathe? Does he look at our eyes? So we look at these kind of things. And we think that the experience is a whole, of course, body and mind in contact. Something that is stressed more in Gestalt therapy is contact. We look in here and now in contact. So how the person, the client, is making contact with the therapist, and also how the therapist is making contact with the client. So when we speak of intentionality, we refer just to the moment of the session. The founders didn't want to create an ontological theory. They wanted to create a clinical theory. So they addressed just the moment of the encounter between therapist and client. So the experience is the experience of the client in contact with the therapist. And body process become more important than the words, as I said before. And body process at this point is a parallel concept of the unconscious. It's our depth. When we see the person who doesn't look at us and seems humiliated, saying, I suffer of panic attacks, we try to be in our body, and we are in contact with our own feelings in front of this person. And we start to think in terms of what is his body revealing to us of his past, of his attachment, habitual attachment style. This is the way he's addressing a person who is in the function of helping him. So a person who is in the function of helping him means quite closely parents or people who have this role to help them. So they're not saying that to a friend. It would be different if they say that to a friend. They're saying it to a person who is in the function of helping them. So this recalls very much the attachment schemas. So the recount about panic attacks, moving legs, etc., or what else? We'd look at how intentionality of contact develops in the here and now of therapeutic relationship. And we support that intentionality instead of revealing unconscious conflicts or unconscious feelings. So we focus at the contact boundary between therapist and client, operating at transcendental reduction using one of Husserl's concept. So we are there, we are there, and we are limited, and we are reducing the reality of the person to our transcendence to our meeting. And we do not separate unconscious from conscious. We stay with the experience as a whole. So what the client does or says is not a way of denying anything for us. It's a creative adjustment. So we might say if we had dynamic mind, we would say maybe the client is feeling humiliated in saying he suffers of panic attacks because he's denying something. He's denying, I don't know, that he doesn't want to admit this reality. This is the dynamic way of thinking, you know. But we think in terms of creative adjustment. So we think, how is this humiliation? Does this humiliation represent a creative adjustment of the person in this situation? So the person comes to me, I'm the therapist, he feels humiliated. How is this, does this humiliation represent a creative adjustment? He's doing his best in this moment. This is the idea. So in his feeling humiliated, there is some vitality that we want to keep. And what is the intentionality of the client? Searching for help and now adjusting to this specific therapist. So the client comes to us with an intentionality. He wants to save something of his life, of his vitality. And when he is in front of the therapist, he reduces this into the reality of the therapist. And how does he adjust creatively to this specific therapist? Does he or she look at the therapist? How? What does the therapist feel? The feeling of the therapist is important because it's part of the field. So the therapist is part of the field and is part of the reality of the client. And we will say this in a moment. So going back to phenomenology, I took some definition of Scott Churchill in his one of his articles for a Springer book in 2016. He says that definitions of phenomenology typically begin with Husserl's method, the transcendental reduction, which opens the immanent field of intentionality for subsequent analysis and description. So you see that we are very close because we both look at intentionality, how the person moves towards the environment, towards the other, towards the therapist. Where we differ, I think, is, but we can discuss about this, is about subsequent analysis and description. Analysis and description makes me think of analysis, of describing what the client feels. And for us, it's not so much describing, but describing can be one of the steps to support intentionality of the client. So we do something, we are very present, we interact with the client in order to support intentionality. So the Scott continues, the what is not the object per se, but the experience of the object. Perfect. This is perfectly in line with us. It's the event itself of our feeling, imagining, perceiving, and remembering, and not the object itself that is felt, imagined, perceived, and remembered. So we are phenomenologists in the way that we consider the relativity of this, of what we feel. What we feel is what we feel, it's not the reality. And we are very much in line with this. I mean, we consider our limits as part of the situation. And it's immanent because it does not exist in the outer world of objects, but rather on the transcendental realm of intending acts. Intending acts. This is very important for us. This is something that we took from phenomenology. It's this intending, namely our modes of attending to things as they appear, that along with the appearances themselves constitute the what of phenomenology. So phenomenology per se grasps the intention, the movement towards. And the relational soul of phenomenology is also very evident from Husserl himself, who was maybe understood, and maybe Valeria can tell us something about this, sure, better than I can do. But Husserl was not understood always in his relational thought, and it was Merleau-Ponty who say that for Husserl, the transcendental subjectivity is intersubjectivity. So we need to interpret Husserl like a relational. Again, I'm very curious about what Valeria will say about this. And for Heidegger, the person is a lighting place where light shines through and illuminates all beings. This is a beautiful description of our aesthetic mind. Since we address the body and the body process, we are in contact with our senses. We train our students to feel their own body and their senses, to feel the situation via their senses. So that we say that the client is masterpiece, is like a masterpiece. Fritz Perls said that the symptom is like a masterpiece. So we look at the client in front of us like a masterpiece, and we let our senses be open to perceive him or her. And he's like a lighting place for us, and that illuminates our mutual interaction. One of our best writers, Irving Polster, who was my first trainer. He wrote a book called Every Person's Like is Worth a Novel. And he said that the neurosis is when a person tries to hide his being interesting and interested in life. So that psychotherapy is a way of discovering the interest of the person, his being interesting and interested in life. And this is what we do with our client. We try to let the beauty emerge in his way of being with us. Therapist and client are bound together in an ontological unity that Heidegger called being in the word. So relationality is one's definitive starting point as a phenomenologist. So going back to the clinical example of the client who comes to us and says that he suffers of panic attacks, how can we perceive this client coming to be cured for panic attacks with a phenomenological and relational lens? How can we structure our being with him or her? So we can go to the relational soul of Gestalt therapy. This is the cover of the book, the founding book, Gestalt Therapy, Excitement and Growth in the Human Personality. So with this word excitement, they meant that in order to have a meaningful meeting, we need to have a novelty, an excitement, a novelty. And without a novelty, there is no growth. And this novelty needs to be aggressed somehow, to be integrated. And they said they made a choice, a methodological choice. When they criticized psychoanalysis, they wanted to find something better, and they said, we cannot know what is inside the client, but the only reality we can witness is the contact boundary, what they called the contact boundary between the therapist and the client. It's nor inside nor outside. It's a reality that is there between the two of them, but they were also influenced by Buber. And they created theory of self that is not an instance, but it's a process. It's a capacity. It's the process of being in contact with the world. So the way the client makes contact with the world, and namely with the therapist during the session, is his self. There is not a self inside the client, but the self is the ongoing process of being with the therapist. And this works with the middle mode. A middle mode was taken from the Greek verbs. Only the Greek verbs have the middle mode. They are verbs that are nor passive nor active, nor transitive nor intransitive. The self is in the middle, so it's active and passive at the same time. And every time there is a contact boundary, they said, there is a field. So the field is the way we meet, the way we are as self in contact. And this creates a field. This creates a reality that is perceived by both. It's a reality where we meet together. So what is the what of a Gestalt therapist? The therapist stays in the here now at the contact boundary with the client. It doesn't think in terms of the internal, of conflict, in the unconscious, but just stays at the contact boundary. And one question is, what does the therapist feel at the presence of this client? So, for instance, as a therapist in front of this client who suffers of panic attacks, I feel strangely calm and trusting. I trust this client. Like, I have the feeling he can do many things. He's a trustful person. He's a reliable person. This is my feeling. Okay. And then I wonder, how is this feeling of the client being reliable? Okay, don't look at this, I feel easy or uneasy. I'm changing this, reliable. How this feeling of being reliable is connected with the life of the client. So if I feel that the client is reliable, I feel secure in front of this client, even if the client is telling me that he suffers of panic attacks. There is a feeling of being reliable in the field. Where does it come from? How is it connected with the life of the client? Of course, we might say, but it can be something of the therapist. How can we be sure that it's something connected with the client? I think that Heidegger and many Sartre can answer to this question. I think that in phenomenological terms, this is quite obvious, that what we feel is connected. It's like an extension of the existence of the other. Another explanation is that also with neurosciences, have demonstrated that the brain is relational, is built in relation. So, for instance, a baby who has cramps in his stomach, he is a baby, so he doesn't know what these cramps are, but he knows something about the cramps according to what happens in the environment. So maybe the mother comes with a smile and says, "Don't worry, this will finish soon. Don't worry." And she has a smile. So the cramp become cramps plus smiling of the mother. If the mother comes with a still face, depressed or anxious, the cramps, the experience of the cramps become cramps plus the anxious mother. So our experience, even neurologically, first of all, and then relationally, is made in relation. There is, I think Van der Kolk says that the brain learns what to expect from the other. So when the client comes to us, it's automatic in his brain and in his way of being with us. He creates the conditions for the other to be like he expects us to be. So our feeling that the client is reliable has to do with this expectation that is created in the field. And so I start to think many things, and from my mind, I use very much for instance, the relational, the attachment style theory, and so I also use very much the developmental knowledge. And so if the client appears reliable to me, I think that maybe this client is a first child who has learned to be reliable. I'm not so sure. I can put some questions to be sure and to orient myself into the past of this client, how he molded, how he created this gestalt with me. And so I have an idea who we are, how we are dialoguing, what he expects from me and what he didn't have from the habitual other. And so the third question is, how can I change in this situation? Not the client, but how can I change? How can I relate to this client in a way that he can feel not so much reliable, not so much pushed to be reliable? So this is a complex thing, complex dialogue, the complex dance that happens between us. And my intention is to support his intentionality for contact that has not been developed in his past. So when he became so reliable, he wanted maybe to have the love of their parents. Narcissistic structure, How can I be a different parent, let's say, in quote. So this process is what I call aesthetic relational knowing. And I made some research about this, I will tell you in a moment. These concepts are developed in these two books, The Now for Next in Psychotherapy. Now for Next is for me, the intentionality that develops in the immediate future, in the Now for Next. And how this is helpful in postmodern society. I think that this approach, the phenomenological approach, the ability to grasp the vitality that is in the body of the person, first of all, and in the whole experience is important in our society, because this is what children, adolescents need to feel recognized, deeply recognized. And this is also a book, a more recent book, Psychopathology of the Situation. I have two chapters in this book, and the other, we approach the psychopathology in situations. So after some theoretical chapters at the beginning, then we approach different situations like children, separations, autism, social closure in adolescents, separation in couples, etc. Of course, I don't think that this is the best, the unique thing to say, but I think I hope that this approach can give some support to our glance to actual suffering. And the aesthetic relational knowing is a way of describing the therapist's intuition somehow. So this process I was telling you before, this bracketing the being with the client and being there with our body, with our senses open, allows us to perceive the field of the client. So how that feeling, how that suffering was created in a meaningful situation. So how can the therapist use their feelings in front of the client? And they can be considered as a phenomenological knowing of the field that is created. And these are I have written a few articles about this also, and I made research. I made a scale, a measure for psychotherapist intuition. It's a phenomenological scale. The scale has been validated. This is the article. I can send you the article, and besides that, they are open access, so you can find it easily. But I can send Francesca or Valeria the links, so that you can have a look, take a look. So it's a revised concept of awareness in contemporary psychiatry, because it's awareness not only to understand ourselves, what we feel, but to connect what we feel with the field of the client that the client brings to therapy. Our awareness is not separated by the client's experience. It's connected with neurosciences. And another thing that is connected with this is the concept of reciprocity and, in quotes, dance. Dance is a metaphorical word. So when we are with the client, we move towards the client, and the client moves towards us. And this movement, I think, is based on an intentionality that is different in different moments of the session. In psychotherapy research, something that is missed or is required is research about the how of the change, the process of change. And this is a way of describing the process of change based on phenomenology, on the phenomenology of reciprocity. It's also connected with the concept of responsiveness that has been very much studied in these last years by Style and other relational scientists, neuroscientists, psychologists, and also phenomenologists, I think. So the concept of responsiveness. It's also connected. Other researchers like Fuchs or Northoff, they speak about intersubjectivity and things very similar also to responsiveness. So the question I would like to answer is how to modulate the presence of the therapist and the client in a dance with the client that supports the intentionality. So again, our aim is to support the vitality of the client. How can we support the vitality of the client? The phenomenology of reciprocity teaches us precisely to look at the dance between therapist and patient, how they try to reach each other, and how they frustrate each other, how it is possible to support blocked intentional movements to develop into contact making with the therapist. So it's a journey. Each session is a journey where different intentionality, moments of intentionality are one after the other. And so I thought to these three main concepts that are important in the therapeutic session. The active presence of the caregiver or therapist is crucial. The resonance of each one to the movement of the other is also important. So resonance is different from empathy for me. Resonance has been studied in many ways, and also empathy. But empathy is the capacity to feel like the other feels, even at the bodily level. With empathy, we are able to be in the body of the other, to feel like the body of the other. Resonance is how we are impacted by the client, you know. So the seeing the feeling that I told you before of reliability. This client seems to me reliable. This is an impact that the client has on me, reliable. And this is resonance for me. It's how I react to the impact of the client. So the co-creation of a third reality, which is the dance, no? So the resonance allows us, as I said before, to understand the field of the client, to understand what the meaningful other feels or felt. What's the position of the meaningful other? If I feel you are reliable, I'm feeling like your parents felt with you, or like most of the people felt with you. So it's the impact on me. It's the other side of the moon of the experience of the client. It's the other with whom the client has learned that suffering. And this allows us to create a dance, because if I feel that the client is reliable, then I will start to move in a certain way. Like I might tell the client, you seem reliable to me. And the client says, oh yes, I've been reliable all my life long. This is a pain in the neck for me. Or I might say, I imagine that it's important for you to relax. You do so many things and you do them well. So my dance starts from the resonance. And these are the steps that I describe in they are procedural, spontaneous actions of contact between therapist and client. At the beginning, what do they do together? They try to build the sense of the ground, of a safe ground. As neuroception, Panksepp say, is Panksepp the neuroception. He's Panksepp. Neuroception is, well, you will tell me later. He says that the client, if the client doesn't feel this basic sense of security, he cannot do any therapy. So if the client feels negative neuroception, the neuroception is a perception that is subcortical. So it's not understandable, it's not logical. It's the way the client feels the situation. So at the beginning, they need to create the sense of a safe ground. Somehow. The breathing of the therapist is very important, how they breathe, how they sit. If they sit calm, they create a calm sense of the ground. And then, after they have created this safe ground, they can open their senses. They can be available to each other. So they start to perceive how the therapist is dressed today, what is the color of the eyes of this therapist, and vice versa. The therapist does the same. So the senses can activate and the energy for contact starts. And the third step is to recognize the intentional resonance of the other. So like, where does the client wants to go today? And the client thinks the same. Where is the therapist? Where does the therapist want to go today? What's the intention of the other? So they try to orient themselves. And the fourth step is to adjust to one another. So they choose, at a certain point, they choose a topic to work on. The client usually chooses the topic. I came here because I want to speak about my panic attacks, or I want to speak about my early relationship with my parents. And the therapist supports this process. So there's the choice of a topic and the work on this topic. And this goes along for for quite a bit along in the session. Most of the session is taken by this adjusting to one another, working, curiosity and working. How do you feel? Have you ever imagined this or all the work that we do? And then at a certain point, something different happens. Some novelty happens. This is in line with the theory of Gestalt therapy that there is no growth if there is not a novelty. Every session, every successive session has some novelty. And this is also in line with Daniel Stern's theory of the developmental psychoanalyst. He said that the mother with the child creates this rupture that the child can take. So maybe the therapist can can ask for an experiment to the client. Well, I would like to, for instance, I would like to know your father. Can you be your father in your chair? I would like to speak with your father. Can you be your father? Or can you be your mother? This is one of the many techniques that Gestalt therapy is very creative in techniques, But the idea, this is not the only one, but the idea is of the experiment, not of the technique. An experiment means to dare together something new that can change the perception of the client. And another step can be to have fun. So to have fun is intimacy. It's like we can have fun. We are on the same boat. And we can have fun even if we did not solve the problem or the problem cannot be solved. But it's a way of being human, both human. And the seventh step is to the feeling that I have reached my therapist from the client, and the feeling from the therapist, I have done a good job. We have done a good job together. We have reached each other at our human level. And the last step is the closure, to close the session with a feeling of intimacy. This is my therapist. It's a special feeling. Okay. So also with these 8 steps, we are doing research on this, qualitative research. And these are a few articles that I have written about this, phenomenology and aesthetic recognition of the dance between psychotherapist and client. This is a clinical example. Also in the book, Psychopathology of the Situation, there is a clinical example. Okay, finished. I've also done some research for mother and child relationship. We have made a grid to observe the mother-child interaction with these dance steps. And it's also, if some of you is interested in children. This is very interesting for the observation of the relationship between mother and child, and also feedback that we can give to parents when there are problems with the child. Okay, just in time.
Okay, thanks a lot.